Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my channel, Fluent Pro Hub.
We're going to explore the science behind why we forget things, especially when we're trying to learn something new. We've been looking at some really cool research on this. How does memory actually work? All that good stuff.
Yeah, and for you listening today, the mission here is twofold. First, we want to help you understand the reasons why you forget things. And then secondly, we want to give you some really practical strategies to actually make what you learn stick.
So let's unpack why forgetting happens in the first place. One concept that comes up a lot is memory decay, which makes it sound like our memories are just slowly dissolving over time.
Yeah, so memory decay is definitely part of it. The basic idea is that the connections in your brain that represent a memory, they can weaken over time if you don't use them, if you don't reinforce them. It's kind of like, those connections, they're not just static, they need to be maintained. Yeah. But the other thing to remember is just the sheer volume of information that your brain processes every single day.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just think about it. Sights, sounds, smells, thoughts, feelings. If we held on to every single detail with the same strength, we'd be totally overloaded.
Yeah, our brains would be fried. So it's like the brain has to prioritize. It filters out what seems less important in the moment. What are some of the reasons that our brains decide to hit the delete button on information?
Well, our sources highlight 4 key factors.
Okay.
So first, and maybe the most obvious one, is lack of repetition. If you learn something new and you never revisit it, that neural pathway, it just weakens. Eventually, it can just disappear. You know what they say, use it or lose it.
Yeah.
Well, there's actually biological truth to that.
It's not enough to just hear something once and expect it to be there forever.
Yeah.
So what's the next culprit working against our memory?
Distractions. Huge factor, especially in the world we live in today. We are just constantly bombarded with information, notifications, conversations. It's like everything's vying for our attention all the time. And that makes it so hard for your brain to actually encode new information in the first place.
Right.
So if your focus is all over the place, that initial memory trace is going to be weak and easily lost.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Trying to concentrate on learning something new when your phone is buzzing every 2 minutes is almost impossible.
Right.
What about the role of emotions? I feel like I remember things way better if there's some kind of emotional weight attached to them.
That's a really interesting point, and it actually lines up perfectly with how our brains are wired.
Okay.
Our brains really prioritize information that triggers an emotional response or a strong association.
Right.
And you can think of these emotional tags as a way of making that memory more significant, more important, so that you can retrieve it more easily later.
Right.
Think about like moments of intense joy or, profound sadness. Those memories tend to be very clear and long-lasting, right?
Oh, yeah.
But then on the flip side, if something feels totally neutral, it doesn't really spark any kind of emotional response. It's less likely to stick around.
So no repetition, too many distractions, and no emotional connection. What's the fourth thing that our sources mention?
The fourth one is a lack of focus during that initial learning process. So if you're trying to learn something new, but your mind is wandering or you're just not really paying attention, the initial encoding of that information, it's going to be weak. It's like trying to remember someone's name when you're already thinking about what you're going to have for dinner later. It just doesn't register properly.
Right. So forgetting isn't necessarily a sign of a bad memory. It often comes down to how we engage with new information in the first place. I like that way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about how our memory actually stores information. There's this great analogy of exploring a new city and how that's kind of like learning new things. Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Sure. So imagine you've just arrived in a new city, right?
Okay.
Everything is unfamiliar, maybe a little bit overwhelming. You're probably relying a lot on maps and GPS to get around. But as you start to navigate the streets, you visit the same landmarks, maybe you get lost a few times, and then you find your way back. Your brain is basically building a mental map of the city.
Cool.
It's strengthening the connections between all those different locations, the routes, the points of interest. And over time, you become more and more familiar with the city and you can navigate it more easily.
So learning new things, whether it's a new skill, a new vocabulary, It's similar. It's like building those connections in our brains over time.
Exactly. It's not like you just download information into your long-term memory instantly. It takes time. It takes reinforcement. It's like going back to that city again and again, retracing your steps and strengthening that mental map. Every time you encounter a new word, you understand its meaning, you use it in a sentence, you're basically reinforcing the neural pathway associated with that word, making it easier to access later.
So it's all about strengthening those pathways. So how do we actually do that? Our sources talk about a ton of practical strategies for improving memory. The first one that really jumps out is the power of repetition, and specifically this idea of spaced repetition.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about how that works.
So spaced repetition is a technique that's really backed by science. And the basic idea is that instead of trying to learn everything at once, like cramming for an exam, you review information at increasing intervals. And this spacing actually forces your brain to work a little harder to retrieve that information from memory right when it's about to be forgotten. And that act of retrieving is so much more powerful than just passively rereading the material.
One of the examples that they give is learning the word exquisite. Can you walk us through that 4-day plan and explain why each step is helpful?
Yeah, so on day 1, you encounter the word exquisite. You write it down, you look up the definition, you make sure you understand what it means. That's the initial encoding phase.
Right.
Then on day 2, the key is to actually use that word. Maybe you write a sentence with it, you create your own example, and that retrieval and application helps you reinforce the meaning and start to build connections with how you might use it yourself. On day 3, you take it even further and try to use it in a conversation. You're basically forcing yourself to recall it in a more dynamic context.
Yeah.
And then finally, on day 4, you test yourself. Can you remember the word and its meaning without any prompts? And that act of retrieval, especially after a little bit of time has passed, is super powerful for solidifying that memory in your long-term storage.
So it's not just staring at the word over and over again. It's about interacting with it and using it in different ways over time.
Exactly.
Another strategy is visual memory. It seems like tapping into the power of images can really help us remember things better. How do we do that?
Well, our brains are actually really good at remembering visual information. When you connect a new word or concept with a vivid mental image or even a real-life scenario, it creates a much richer and more robust memory trace than just relying on text alone.
Yeah, and they gave the example of the word serene. Instead of just memorizing the dictionary definition, peaceful and calm, you create a mental picture of a tranquil lake with birds singing in the background.
Right. That multisensory image, the visual of the water, the sound of the birds, it gives your brain multiple ways to access that memory of the word serene. It becomes more than just a word on a page. It becomes a more tangible and memorable experience.
Okay, moving on to storytelling or creating a mental hook.
Yeah.
How does weaving a narrative around new information help make it stick?
Well, stories provide context, and our brains are really good at remembering narratives. When you embed a new word or a concept within a story, it's no longer just an isolated piece of information. It becomes part of a larger, more meaningful framework.
And I love the little anecdote about John being perplexed by talking parrots. It's kind of a funny, unexpected situation that makes the word perplexed, meaning confused, more memorable.
Exactly. The more engaging or even a little bit unusual the story is, the more likely it is to create a strong mental hook that you can easily retrieve later.
Makes sense. We've also got emotion-based learning. And we already talked a little bit about how emotions can enhance memory, but how can we intentionally use that when we're learning something new?
The key here is to consciously connect new information with specific feelings or past emotional experiences. So let's say you're learning the word elated. Instead of just reading the definition, try to actually recall a specific moment when you felt incredibly happy or you had a sense of achievement. By making that deliberate association between the feeling and the word, you create an emotional anchor for that memory.
It's like putting a little emotional flag on it so you can find it more easily later.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, what about using real-life experiences? How is that different from visualization?
Well, it's similar to visualization, but it's even more directly tied to your personal life. So let's say you're learning the word aroma.
Okay.
Make a conscious effort to really pay attention to the pleasant smells around you, like the aroma of your morning coffee or the scent of flowers. By linking the word to real-life sensory experiences, you make it more tangible and relatable to you.
I like that. It makes learning less abstract and more connected to your everyday life.
Right.
And then there's the keyword method. This sounds like a neat little trick.
Yeah, the keyword method is a mnemonic technique where you find a word in your native language that sounds similar to the new word you're trying to learn. And then you create a link, maybe a mental image, connecting that keyword with the meaning of the new word. So you're basically building a bridge between something you already know and something new.
And they gave a good example with the words fragile and frail. The similar sound creates that immediate association that helps you remember the meaning.
Exactly.
Okay, so all of these techniques are great for getting new information into our brains, but the next one, practical application, speaking and writing more, that seems like a really crucial step for solidifying what we've learned.
Absolutely. Passive learning can only take you so far. The act of actually using new vocabulary in your speaking and writing is incredibly powerful. It forces you to access those newly formed neural pathways, and it strengthens them every time you successfully use a word correctly in a real context.
It's not enough to just know the definition, you've got to actually use it.
Exactly.
And the Thors suggest some concrete actions, like using new words in your daily conversations, writing stories, journaling, or participating in discussions.
Exactly. The more you actively use the language, the more automatic and effortless the recall becomes.
Okay, last but not least, learning through music and movies.
Yes.
This sounds like a more fun, passive way to learn new words.
You know, music and movies, they offer such a rich and contextualized environment for language learning. You're not just seeing words on a page, you're hearing them used naturally in conversation, you're hearing them sung in songs, and often you have visual cues to go along with them. And even the emotional tone of the music or the visuals in a movie can help you infer the meaning of unfamiliar words.
And they use the example of understanding the word melancholy through the tone of a song.
Right. You might not know the exact definition right away, but if you hear a sad or somber melody, you can kind of get a sense of what the word means.
So you're picking it up through context and emotion.
Exactly.
So we've covered a whole bunch of strategies for improving memory, especially when it comes to language learning. But our source material also really emphasizes why memory is so important in the first place.
Yeah, mastering vocabulary is all about building those strong and reliable neural pathways in your brain. When you can recall words effortlessly without having to think too hard about it, it really boosts your fluency and your confidence in speaking and writing. It lets you express yourself more accurately and spontaneously.
It's the difference between constantly translating in your head and actually thinking in the language.
Exactly. Effortless recall frees up your cognitive resources so you can focus on the more complex aspects of communication. You can express nuanced ideas and really engage in conversations more fully.
So the big takeaway here is that it's not just about passively absorbing information and hoping it sticks.
Right.
You've got to actively engage with it in different ways to build those strong neural connections. Use it, visualize it, create stories, attach emotions to it, relate it to your own life.
It's about making that learning process more active, more engaging, and more personally meaningful. And by doing that, you can really enhance your ability to remember and apply new knowledge.
So the next time you come across something new, don't just try to memorize it. Think about how can you really experience it and make it a lasting part of your knowledge.
That's a great question.
Thanks for joining us.
If you found this video helpful, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe for more engaging content to improve your English. Keep practicing and take care.